So as I mentioned, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Joanna Graham, and I'm delighted to be joining you today to talk about MBA resumes. A lot of folks sometimes think that this is not a topic that needs an entire webinar. But if you have started working on your applications for business school, you probably have realized that maybe there's a little bit more to the storytelling component than you anticipated. And a big part of that, and an often overlooked part, is the resume that you submit with your application. So we will break down why that's so important, what those key differences are, and then we'll actually go through and we will take a look at a couple of different types of resumes that have been sort of a before and after, so that way you can take a look and see how you can think about reworking your resume wherever you are in the process as well. And actually, just a quick note about myself before we get started as well. So, as I mentioned, my name is Joanna. I've been working in higher ed, standardized testing, and admissions in various capacities for the last 23 years. I spent about a decade at the Graduate Management Admission Council, where I was the product manager for the GMAT exam and oversaw all of our testing operations. So if you are in the in the midst of studying for the GMAT and going through fits, I apologize for that. But hopefully your prep is going well. I've also and I also built a whole other career as a chief marketing and product officer. And so as I've worked with applicants and clients over the years to help them with their business school applications, have really leveraged the idea of sort of building a personal brand, the power of storytelling, the power of really stringing together a narrative that hits on all those key points. And so I absolutely love this work that I do with folks, and look forward to spending a little bit of time with you today, breaking down one of the maybe not quite as exciting components of the application, but certainly very, very important. So to start, target test prep, if you are not familiar with target test prep or TTP, TTP really is your one-stop shop for all things graduate management admissions noteworthy. So whether you're studying for the GMAT or the GRE, TTP does offer a variety of different products and services, everything from self-study courses to live courses to private one-on-one tutoring. And the same for admissions consulting. So this is a newer service, admittedly. It's been around for a little over about a year. But there is a wonderful team of other consultants and myself. Most of us have over a decade of experience I think a decade to 23 years of experience in the space. And as I mentioned, we are available to support you in whatever capacity you need as you're putting your applications together. Whether that's through school packages or hourly or a la carte options. And we can certainly feel free to chat more. And I'll make sure that you all have my contact details at the end if you'd like to sign up for a free consultation
I'm
as
in a
well.
webinar, MBA stuff.
Well, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone, that would be fantastic, please. Thank you. So our agenda for today, we will do a bit of an overview of sort of what a holistic admissions process is, and so what that really means when you think about admissions in the B school space. And then we will dive right in and talk about sort of what a business school resume looks like versus a corporate resume. As I mentioned, we'll go through some very industry specific resumes and actual bullet points so you can take a look at what you might want to consider based on the industry that you're coming from. We'll talk through some do's and don'ts, and then we will open it up for questions. And that should take us just about to the full hour. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in then? So holistic admissions is really just a fancy way of saying that schools are not weighting one piece of the application necessarily with a certain point value or more so than another. The idea here is that business schools recognize that people come from diverse backgrounds, have diverse experiences, and they need to be evaluated holistically as people, because we are talking about people at the end of the day, not widgets. And the idea of holistic admissions is designed to help schools identify fit with their program, with their mission, with their values, by looking at a variety of different pieces. So we'll break these down really quickly. The first, obviously, is professional experience, and it's probably the one that folks. Well, it's really why we're here today, but it's really the one that I think folks can control probably to the best degree possible at this point. This is really talking about what type of work have you been engaged in. either potentially during your undergraduate experience or more likely than not since graduating from your undergrad experience. Professional experience captures everything. It captures what you have done, how you have done it, the impact you've been able to drive. And then all of those wonderful soft skills that you see on this list here as well, things like leadership, grit, resilience. How have you managed sort of to get through adversity potentially in your professional career as well? And probably more importantly, what does that career trajectory look like? For many people applying to business school, they are looking at the MBA as a way to pivot from one industry or one job into another. And so part of that, what schools are looking for, is part of that process is going to be really taking a critical look at the experiences that you have aggregated in your career and thinking about how those have set you up well for the challenge of business school, but also for what you want to do beyond business school. Academics are the next piece. And the reason the reason for that, as you can imagine, is schools want to make sure that you are going to be successful in the classroom. They're going to look at a couple of things here. They're going to look at your transcript from your undergrad experience, or if you also have a master's degree that is more recent, they'll take a look at that as well. They'll see, did you take challenging courses? Do you have a history of taking some quant courses when you were in school? How did you choose to challenge yourself with the coursework that you pursued? And maybe is there some business or some relevant coursework in there that would help you in business school or give school some indication of how you might do in that program. Undergraduate GPA or GU GPA here is going to be the primary metric that schools are looking at. It is important because obviously when you look at things like the rankings, schools are evaluated based on the average undergraduate GPA for incoming students. And so that is something certainly that schools are looking to compare and contrast against. It is really important to remember though that the further out you are from your undergrad experience, I don't want to say the less relevant GPA is, but there are other things that you can do to mitigate against having potentially a lower GPA than you would like. The first thing, number one, is if you have a master's degree, if you've received another degree since your undergraduate degree, and if that GPA is higher, the good news is that that will certainly help offset that undergraduate GPA a bit. Schools will recognize that you were a slightly different version of yourself when you were an undergrad. And so they're going to look at the most recent version of yourself, which would be that master's GPA potentially from another program. Or if you've done some additional coursework, that certainly is going to be something they'll take a look at as well. Just anything to really give them a good sense of what your academic potential and capabilities are is certainly going to be important. Test scores. So GMAT, GRE, the executive assessment, you name it, there is a whole alphabet soup of standardized assessments that schools will accept. More and more these days, you are seeing schools accepting even more types of assessments. But for the sake of tonight's conversation, we'll focus on the GMAT, GRE, and executive assessment. These scores, again, I'm sure all of you are prepping for or have prepped for these exams at some point. These scores are going to be what schools scrutinize pretty closely as well. If you have a low undergraduate GPA, this is also a great data point that can help offset some of those worries that a school might have about your ability to be successful in the classroom. One of the things that I like to mention to folks is that while there isn't a perfect swap, so it's not like there's a mark that you need to hit on the GMAT or the GRE in order to offset that GPA. It is something that can give schools confidence. For example, maybe if there are some blemishes on that transcript, maybe your quant GPA, if you majored in something that was quant based, or your quant coursework was not as high as you would like it to be, and let's say you knock the GMAT quant out of the park. And that will help give business schools the confidence that you'll be able to be successful in the classroom. So certainly those test scores can go a long way in terms of helping to sort of improve your standing or improve your overall profile. Extracurricular activities and community service, we'll bundle these together. Actually, give me just a second. I'm going to mute. If folks wouldn't mind muting, it would be great, but I'm going to go ahead and see if I can just mute everyone automatically through here as well. Just because we do have a lot of content to get through tonight. I want to make sure that everyone can hear appropriately. Okay, there we go. All right, sorry about that, folks. All right, so extracurricular activities and community service. So we'll bundle those two together. This is really an indication of to sending a signal to schools of how you choose to spend your time outside of work. For anyone who went to school in the United States for their undergrad experience, you probably remember filling out maybe it was a list of 10 or 20, depending on if you use the Common App or the University of California platform extracurricular activities that you were involved with in high school. It's not to say that you need to have a list of 10 or 20. Certainly, most working professionals do not. But what schools do want to see, very similar to the undergrad experience, is when you are not working, how do you choose to spend your time? And are you doing so by engaging in things that make your community, your workplace, other people's lives a little bit better? So extracurriculars can be just about anything that is related to your community. If you are involved maybe in an affinity group at your employer or your place of work, that certainly counts as well, since that is something that sort of falls out of the sort of just my job category. Folks oftentimes ask what type of community service or what types of activities should I be engaged in? Is there something specific that schools are looking for? And I would say, it's important to make sure that those things align with what it is you are actually interested in and passionate about. That's probably the most important piece. If you are a little late in terms of adding extracurricular activities and you're working on applications right now, I would say, you should not be going out tomorrow and signing up for 10 new activities. But if there is even just one thing that you can do to show that there are things that you do genuinely care about outside of work. Certainly, every little bit helps. But I would make sure that you think about how you're choosing to spend your time, and really thinking about the trade-offs that come with balancing GMAT or GRE preparation with working on your applications and also adding additional extracurriculars. But extracurriculars, as I mentioned, can be anything from, from community service. It could be if you are a runner and you fundraise to support various charities and you run a marathon once a year, that certainly is a great activity. It could be volunteering at an animal shelter. It could be, working with a local nonprofit and doing their books for them. There are a variety of different things that you can do that sort of count under that extracurricular umbrella. And I would encourage you to think about that, particularly if you have a longer runway when it comes to your applications. Next up is alignment with a school's mission and values. This is going to sound pretty obvious, probably to most folks, but I can't tell you how many folks I work with or I'll start working with. And when I ask them point blank, why do you want to go to Columbia or why do you want to go to Ross? They don't have a clear answer that aligns with what the school's mission is, what the school is actually good at. I think there are a lot of folks who still select schools based off of a ranking or a brand, and a perception that comes with that. And so when schools are looking at your applications, when they're reading those essays, they're looking to see, are you aligned with the values that we hold to be true? And do you address those directly in multiple places in your application? One of the easy places to go look for this information, number one, is on their website and going and looking up their mission statement. It's pretty obvious and easy there. But when you think about how it manifests in the application itself, the essays are going to certainly be a place where you can glean some of that from the questions, but also the letters of recommendation. When you look at the skills, when you look at the qualities that schools are asking your letter writers to evaluate you on, that sends a signal that tells you a lot about the things that they hold to be important. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that and dig a little bit more deeply into that if you haven't already as part of your school research process. Next up, we talk about brand, and I don't want this to sound overly commercial or commoditized, but I think having a very distinct point of view and a very distinct perspective and voice is going to be incredibly important as you think about how you are articulating what your story is, whether it is through your essays, whether it's through letters of recommendation and the guidance that you're giving your letter writers, or those interviews schools schedule as well. And so really thinking about what are your reasons for wanting to pursue an MBA? What are you going to be doing with that degree? How does all of this roll up, though, based on your personal experiences, based on your professional experiences? If you have to sort of encompass or sort of pull your entire story into a sentence or two, what would that sentence look like, or what would that sentence sound like if you had to really come up with one distinct perspective, in terms of why you're choosing to pursue this path? That is also another webinar probably for another time. We do a whole we do a whole series of webinars on personal branding and thinking about how you present that through essays as well. So stay tuned for some of those later on this season as well. As I mentioned before, soft skills are going to be something they look for as well. And spoiler alert, this is something we will dig into quite a bit when we think about the resume and how you're talking about your accomplishments and your results from the workplace. But the big thing here is really thinking through those soft skills. Number one, you can get a list from the letters of recommendation and see what types of things you're being asked to be, the writers are being asked to evaluate you on. But number two, when you think about business schools typically will lead with the fact that they are looking for strong leaders or future leaders in the workforce. And so thinking about the things that come along with that. So in addition to leadership, intellectual curiosity, grit and resilience, how do you handle adversity in the workplace or personal adversity? It tells a school a lot about what type of student you're going to be, what type of classmate, what type of roommate you're going to be. But more importantly, these are things that are really hard to evaluate and gauge um, just by looking at a transcript. And so it's really important that you think about how do you talk about these things in various places in your application. And then finally, the interview. Interviews come in all sorts of shapes and forms, but it is something certainly that many schools will leverage to really get a read on a candidate, to really make you much more three-dimensional. And so I always encourage folks to certainly, if you are fortunate enough to be invited to interview, take the time to really think about how you take your story to the next level. Make sure that you have a planning doc that has additional stories, that has additional information that maybe didn't make it into your application, that you would want to make sure that a school is hearing from you or that builds on some of the storytelling that you started. So again, a pretty comprehensive list here in terms of what schools are looking for in the application process. And obviously we'll dig into all this a bit more intentionally in the next couple slides. All right, so the reason we're here today, let's talk about resumes. So all of you, I'm sure, have multiple versions of your resume. And I suspect that they are probably multiple versions of a corporate resume. So something that you send to a recruiter, something that you submit to a job board online, but something that as you are looking for a new employer, you can demonstrate that you have mastery of certain skills, mastery of certain competencies, or even maybe or specifically sort of technical skills. The idea here is that you are trying to prove to an employer, to a company, that you can do the job that you are applying for and then some. It is a much more technical document than what you would use for business school. When you think about business school, an MBA resume is really providing a roadmap or a framework for the rest of your application and the future interview. At many business schools, the interviewers are not going to receive a full copy of your application, but they will receive a copy of your resume or your CV. That is going to give them a roadmap for the questions that they're going to ask you, and really help them understand how have you chosen to pursue various opportunities? What have you actually been able to accomplish? And more importantly, how has your career evolved, particularly if you're a little bit on the earlier side of your career? It's also important to think about your audience here. So for a corporate resume, your audience is typically going to either be the recruiter or a hiring manager. This is important because these folks are typically going to have some technical frame of reference or some technical knowledge about the job and about the industry that you are applying for a job in. For MBA, you're typically talking about an admissions officer or maybe an interviewer. That could be someone from the admissions office. It could also be a graduate of the program. And so there's no guarantee that if you are coming from the tech world, that what happens if you get someone who has spent 30 years working in the nonprofit space and isn't necessarily going to have a frame of reference for everything that you are referring to in your resume. So it is really important to just recognize that there will be some things that you may want to not water down, but certainly provide some context for. And we'll talk again a little bit more about what that looks like in just a bit. When you think about how the resume rolls up into the larger application picture, so if you think about your whole application package as a jigsaw puzzle, and every piece sort of has of the application has resumes really are the what, and your essays are going to give the why. So if you think about the resumes again as that roadmap, your essays really are going to be the why behind all of this. Hold on one second. I think we had a few more folks join, and I apologize for pausing again. If you have joined, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphone, otherwise, let me see if I can. I have to go back and see if I can find that again. Give me just one second, folks. I'm sorry. All right, super. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate you guys muting your mics. All right, so let's go and talk a little bit more about the actual elements here now of a resume. All right, so number one, professional experience. This is really the crux of the resume itself. A couple of best practices. Number one, you want to list your roles chronologically. This may sound like common sense to a lot of folks, but in some industries, folks will have resumes that are grouped by skill set. For example, for an MBA resume, you want to list out all of your jobs in chronological order. When you think about the bullets that you are creating, that you're drafting for these roles, they should be commensurate with the amount of time spent in the role. And so, what that means basically is if you are including an internship from your time as an undergrad, even if it was an incredible internship and you did a ton of work, if it was a 2.5 or 3 month internship, there's no reason for that internship to have 5 or 6 bullets when your current role, which maybe you've been in for over a year, only has 2 or 3 bullets. And so really think about how do you roll up those experiences? Again, how do you demonstrate impact, but do so in a concise way? You do want to show, as I mentioned, that career progression. And if the path isn't linear, it is important to think about how do you address some of those changes. Certainly, this will be something you could address in the interview and other parts of your application. But in your resume, especially if there are things, for example, like career gaps, this has been something that I've seen even more so, obviously coming out of the pandemic and in recent years in particular. There are oftentimes folks who do have gaps, employment gaps, or maybe have pivoted because they couldn't maybe find a role in their current industry, and so they decided to pivot. Another alternative is for folks who are thinking about changing career pathways altogether. Sometimes that comes with maybe a lateral move, or maybe even a move that on paper feels like a step down if you're moving into a role so that you can learn an industry and vet it to see if it truly is the right fit for you. Regardless, it is important to make sure that you are showing and sort of demonstrating through your resume why those changes sort of have occurred. Particularly again, as I mentioned, if that path isn't linear, and especially if there's some deltas or some differences in the nomenclature around roles. For lesser known organizations, do consider a slight or small description. I'm not talking about a paragraph here. I'm not even talking about 2 or 3 lines, but even just a one-liner that explains really quickly what industry this organization is coming from, and what the organization does. And that's something you can certainly include with, sort of with the headline of the organization on your resume. The focus here really should be impact, and you'll see this again in some of the sample resume bullets. Whenever possible, you want to be quantifying results. Talk about metrics. So if you managed a team, how many people were on that team? If you identified cost savings for a client, if you're in consulting, um, can you put a dollar amount on that? I recognize that there are a lot of industries where you can't always be super specific about clients that you're working with or about all of the work that you are doing. But wherever possible, it is really important to think about how can you quantify, or provide a little more context to those results. If you think about it this way, the folks with whom you're competing are all likely they're going to be folks coming from industries that you have in common. And so when you think about sort of how much you're able to share, or how much you want to share in your resume, think of those folks kind of on your left and right as your direct competition. And so there are creative ways certainly to talk about the things that you are doing on a day-to-day basis without revealing too much information. So I encourage you to really think about what are the things that are most impressive about the work that you're doing. And probably one of the best things you can do right now, particularly if you have a longer runway here in terms of planning for business school, is whenever you switch jobs, take the time to write out all those accomplishments, to start writing out some of those stories. Certainly, it'll be helpful as you're updating your resume, but it's also going to be really helpful as you think about potential content for essays and interviews as well. I mentioned before that your audience is not necessarily going to have a background or some context for the industry that you're in. So I do encourage folks when you are working on your resumes, reduce what we call sort of technical or industry specific jargon. Um, One of the things that I encourage folks to think about when they're working on resumes is I call it the grandparent test. At the end of the day, when you are done with your resume, you should be able, in theory, to hand it over to someone who does not come from your industry and who doesn't necessarily have a strong frame of reference for the work that you're doing. And so, not to pick on grandma or grandpa, but more often than not, that generation sometimes represents a good litmus test here. So think about if you could hand your resume to your grandma, and if she can understand and paraphrase for you what you have done, then you have written it appropriately. And then lastly, when it is relevant, feel free to include internships. Caveat here, this does not mean include every single internship that you completed while you were an undergrad, but wherever it is relevant to either the industry that you're in or perhaps the industry that you're looking to pivot into, you can certainly include those. And just remember what I said a little bit earlier, though, the bullet points that you have for those resumes should be commensurate with the amount of time that you spent in the role. So just make sure you're being very mindful of that. Volunteer experience. So this section size is going to vary for folks in terms of size and scope. As I mentioned before, extracurriculars and volunteer experience are going to demonstrate your passion, how you choose to spend your free time outside of work, and ideally, some leadership, whether it is in title or potentially maybe the opportunity to lead various initiatives. This is also a great way for folks to be able to demonstrate leadership even if you don't necessarily lead at your place of work. So maybe you're an individual contributor, maybe you've just joined the company and you aren't necessarily leading a team. Your extracurricular experience can be a great place to make up for some of that and to be able to show that you do have the skills to lead initiatives or to lead teams well. Much like your professional experience, I encourage folks to list those roles chronologically. This should be an entirely separate section on your resume. If you don't have volunteer experience or extracurriculars, I do encourage you to think about some of those work-related initiatives. So I had mentioned, employee resource groups or affinity groups, anything that you can potentially be involved with in at work that isn't necessarily a part of your day-to-day job is certainly a better place to start than none. For education, make sure that you do include your graduation year, your GPA. You can certainly include any relevant awards or honors. This section should not be very big, though. Let me just, I can't stress this enough. This is typically the first thing that folks see on a resume. I would make sure, though, that you don't have to list all of your coursework. You don't need to list fellowship programs that you've been a part of. If you graduated with honors, that can certainly be on the same line with your graduation year and GPA. But really, education should feel more like a headline or a banner and less like a fully fleshed out section, unless you do have multiple degrees. And then finally, the interest in additional information sessions. So this is something that's usually a couple lines at the bottom. This is a great place to include passions and interests that you haven't been able to capture elsewhere. So this could be things like hobbies. Oftentimes, folks will include a couple of interesting things that they do. Maybe you're an amateur triathlete. Maybe you like to play the guitar. Maybe you hold a random Guinness Book of World Record in pillow spinning or some other random hobby or activity. This should not be an incredibly large section either. The way to think about this is a great way to pique the interest of the admissions officer. It's also a great way to maybe to find some common ground potentially if you're lucky with an interviewer. I will tell you some of the things when I've read applications that pique my interest or that I find to be particularly compelling. When folks have played a competitive sport, maybe they were a college athlete or maybe they're playing in an amateur league or a club league as an adult. Another thing, if folks have taken the time to train for like a marathon or an Ironman triathlon or something to that effect, where there's a significant amount of time that goes into training for something and potentially fundraising, maybe if that's attached to it as well. Things that demonstrate that you've had to be very strategic and thoughtful about how to build a schedule, how to stick to basically a work plan or a training plan or something to that effect that has various milestones because it shows number one that you have that discipline. But number two, it also shows that you're able to juggle multiple responsibilities at the same time and parallel track those things. And so those are nice ways to also demonstrate additional soft skills. without actually coming out and saying it. The one thing I would mention here is you don't need to include what we sort of call common skills. So you don't need to mention that you are a whiz at Microsoft Word and Excel, or in Google Suite and Google Slides, you name it. Um, that is just an understood thing these days. And even for most folks, if you're fluent in something like Python, or C or SQL, I don't recommend typically that folks include all of those things on on their resume, particularly if it's something that aligns with the industry that you are coming from. So if you are a developer, I would just assume that those are skills you already have. So I would think about skills and just make sure that you're making the most out of that real estate on your resume, and not including things that the vast majority of the population probably are pretty fluent in. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of examples here now. So these are bullets from resumes from folks who have applied to business school in the past. Obviously, we've stripped out PII from excuse me from all of these, but the original text you can see here. There were, I think, first off, the first thing that jumped out to me when I was reading this, is that every single verb every single verb is an ing verb here, and so you want to make sure that you are focusing on action-oriented verbs and also active tenses. And so if you take a look, you can see sort of how we reworked part of this person's resume here. So instead of managing projects, leading teams, ensuring execution of key objectives, that was very, very vague. So we basically we picked one thing. What was the most impressive thing that this person did during their time? They built a database that had over 150 critical data and analytics reports. Again, something very, very quantifiable, and it's very specific in terms of what did they actually do. They interviewed 50 external stakeholders, including C-suite executives, and created some maps, and they talk about which departments benefited from those. This inclusion of the C-suite executives here is a great way to be able to show that individuals are capable of both, communicating laterally, but also communicating vertically within an organization. 50 external stakeholders demonstrates that they're able to liaise with someone external to their organization, not just internal folks. The next one you can see here, the contract extension, earning a 100% increase. So now this has revenue implications, much more specific than talking about just developing client relationships and winning or extending contracts. And then the last one here, this identified an opportunity for $50 million in cost savings over 5 years. Again, dollar amount, time bound, and then most importantly, the impact or the results here. The client is currently implementing this opportunity. So this was something that the associate identified, teed up to the client, and more importantly, the client took the feedback and is running with it. So you can see here the difference between these sort of very vague bullets, developing client relationships, facilitating meetings, workshops, working directly for a CEO. Now you can actually see what did this person accomplish during their time there. All right, so let's move over to finance now. So here's your original text that we have here. So again, I think the first thing that might jump out to you is that you see some dollar signs, you see some numbers. So the initial thought is, okay, like there's quite a bit here. There are more metrics than the consulting resume. Um, what I'm going to call out is the fact that there are 7 bullets here, though. Um, if you are a vice president of finance, so yes, you probably have much more responsibility. But even still, in this case, the person had not been in the role that long. So we pared this down to 3 bullets. And again, tried to capture some of the most significant things here. So again, you can see here, sizing the client portfolio. So $10 billion client portfolio. I think that last bullet is particularly impactful. Again, in this case, again, cost savings, $100 million reduction in expenses and saving $10 million in expenses for a client. And then I think oops, sorry, apparently my mouse is going crazy apparently as well. Um, as you can see here on that first bullet then too, talking about and sizing this, they talked about 25 exceptional treasury professionals. Um, we just rolled this up into provided strategic leadership and change management expertise. There was a lot of change happening at the organization. This person was leading the team through it. I'm sure that all folks are exceptional, but we don't need to provide that much detail. We really just want to be able to say, hey, what did you do? How did you do it? And what were the results? So now let's talk about a college role. So this is particularly applicable, for example, maybe if you are an undergraduate or if you are applying to business school and you have fewer than 3 years of work experience, maybe you're thinking about a deferred entry program for a variety of reasons. There are going to be folks who include jobs that they had while they were an undergrad. So in this case, you can see someone was a resident advisor. On the surface, it probably didn't feel like a huge commitment or a particularly strategic job. But if you take a look at what we were able to sort of glean from some of this, not only was this person promoted, but they also did quite a bit of marketing work. So they had the second bullet that was, they managed the official the Instagram account. And then they were working on improving some processes. They enhanced positive staff dynamics, which feels pretty vague. The reality was that they started, in addition to social media, they launched and led 5 different marketing campaigns over the course of a year. This was particularly important. We called out the fact that it was Gen Z. This person was interested in marketing down the road. I think being able to call out the fact that you're working out with Gen Z or potentially even, Gen Alpha these days now as well. Being able to show that you have direct experience with a particular generation is going to be important, and then calling out the various channels. When you think about managing a team, managing 75 freshman residents and an 8-person RA team, that is a lot of personal management, especially when you are a 21 or 22-year-old young adult. You can see here they were running monthly programs that averaged 5x student attendance compared to other programs. So obviously, if you're able to recruit folks and get them to show up for meetings and things, you're doing something right. I think this last one is actually particularly interesting. As you can see here, they were conducting a social media audit as part of the work they did managing social media. They were able to put together quite a bit of data, and there was, as part of a larger project, there was an industry professional who used this audit in their research, and shared this students and slash young professionals findings at additional higher ed conferences. And so being able to demonstrate that type of impact, again, very similar to the cost savings with consulting, we saw this idea of, does a client actually implement the feedback you're providing, or the recommendations that you're making? In this case, someone outside of the industry completely took the research that this person did and rolled it up into something much bigger. All right, so let's move into tech. And so here again, very similar to the others, we talked a lot about metrics here. As you can see here, there was a good bit of there was some jargon in here. There was a good bit of just sort of vague bullets though, as you can see here. And so what we really tried to do again was focus on these metrics. Working in a startup, I think the pendulum swings are a bit wider oftentimes. I think the third bullet here, where they were talking about negotiating licensing deals, it reduced go-to-market time by 75%. They grew the customer base. The year-over-year revenue growth was 34%. They were able to generate a profit. All of these things, again, are incredibly impactful, particularly for companies that are very young and moving very quickly. And then finally, so I know we went through quite a bit here. Let's sort of roll all this up into some broader sort of do's and don'ts. And so as you're thinking about your resume, number one, and as you think about and I would say this is applicable to your MBA application as well. So number one, spend some time inventorying your experiences. So sit down, take a look at your resume. Hopefully you have a digital archive of all the various iterations of your resume that you've had over the years. It's not a bad idea to sit down and take a look at all of the bullets that you've included over the years. Chances are the more experience that you've aggregated, you've had to drop some things off of your resume. Or maybe if you pivoted or changed industries, you dropped some bullets that were a little bit less relevant. Go back, inventory everything that you've done. Think about the learnings that you've had. Think about those results that you've been able to drive. But also think about the skills. One of the things that's really, really helpful is if you take a look at the skills that you developed, both technical and soft skills in each job, and then start mapping those again to what is being asked of in the letter of recommendation, matrix and grid, but also the skills that are being asked. That you're being asked to sort of address through the various essays. And so it's a great roadmap document for you to start building there. You can start mapping stories to skills that, again, you can use in the application, but you can also sort of save this for the interview. This is all going to be great content that a little bit of work now is certainly going to save you some time down the road. Your resume should tell a story. So there should be a story arc here. It doesn't have to be linear. So don't mistake growth for being linear necessarily. The focus here really should be how have you grown and developed as an individual? Have you been on a journey trying to accrue certain types and aggregate certain types of experiences? And I think most importantly, what has the impact of that work been? And so again, as you saw in some of those examples, what impact were you able to drive at your organization? What results did you have, and what were the outputs? I think particularly when folks have promotions or receive promotions at jobs too, it is really important to call those roles out separately if you can. So that way it is very, very clear to the reader to see what how your roles and responsibilities have evolved and changed as you've grown within the organization. So again, we talked a little bit here about using action verbs and numbers or percents to convey impact. Obviously, whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you're able to say based on the industry that you're in is going to be very important. But as much as you can, obviously, share whatever you are comfortable with and whatever you're able to really convey the impact of your work. We talked about the grandparent test here, so make sure that when you are done working on your resume, that you can hand it to someone who does not come from your industry and who would be able to give you a summary of what it is you have done in your career. And then the last litmus test here, which we didn't talk as much about, but make sure that when you look at your resume and your essays side by side, that they are aligned. Chances are there will be a few things in your essays that pull from bullets in your resume. Make sure that there aren't any redundancies, but above all, make sure that there are no contradictions. Make sure everything is consistent before you submit everything. On the downside here, unless you have at least 10 years of experience, your resume should not be longer than a page. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. I will tell you right now, even when I was reading applications at programs, oftentimes we would not read the second page. If there was a second page submitted, we would stop at the end of the first. And so it's not that we were trying to punish folks, but this really is an exercise in discipline and brevity as well. So I do encourage you to really try to fit everything onto one page. Make sure that you're not using technical or industry specific jargon. Make sure that you consider your audience. And also do not punch your resume to the very, very end. There are so many folks I meet who they push the resume off until the week before everything else is due. And then that's when you get some of those inconsistencies maybe between your resume and between your essays. This is something I really do encourage you to prioritize early and really think about, because in many ways this is going to set up the roadmap for how schools read your application and how they read your story. When I read applications, typically the very first thing I look at before I ever read an essay is the resume, because that gives me the roadmap for everything else that I'm going to look at. Similar to that technical and industry specific jargon, the reason here is, but do not ever assume that your reader is going to know the organization you work for or the industry. And then finally, make sure that you are not being redundant with your essays. So you want to make sure that, again, that the content is tangentially related and there's enough overlap to sort of prove the point and to demonstrate what the impact has been. Certainly, if there are things that you can build on in the essays, that's going to be ideal. But you want to make sure that you're not duplicating anything in your efforts here as well. All right, let me hit pause here for just a moment and let me take a quick peek in the chat box and see how we are doing. All right, so we had a couple of questions around competitive GPA and what a competitive GPA would be. So it's going to vary by school. One of the things that I would encourage you to do as you are doing your school research is to take a look at the reported GPA range that schools report. That'll certainly give you an indication of what schools are looking for. It's not to say that if you are outside of that range, you should not apply at all, but just know that there are going to be other parts of your application then that need to work a little bit harder for you. So for example, if the average GPA at a program is a 3.7 and you're sitting at a 3.6, again, it doesn't mean that there aren't folks who applied with a sub 3.7. It just means that schools are going to be looking at other parts of your application to try to bring from that overall average up. As I said at the beginning, this is one of the reasons why schools do employ a holistic approach to admissions as well, because they are considering every aspect of the individual. The other thing that I would mention here as well is that when you think about GPAs, it's not to say that one school's GPA is better than another, or one major is better or more rigorous than another. But it certainly is going to be something that's, if if you came from a very technical undergraduate program, so if you studied computer science, if you studied engineering, that may lend itself and or maybe viewed a little bit differently compared to another course of study. And so it is important for you to recognize too that there are going to be other things that schools are looking at in addition to just that number on the page. We had a couple of questions about recordings. Yes, there will be a recording sent out with the slides within 24 hours, I believe. So resumes to school events. So that's a great question. So if you are going to events, so if you're going to to some of the tours that come through various cities, I'll be honest, I was on that tour circuit for years. The last thing that I ever wanted to do was carry more paper home. What I would recommend that you do though is because you are going to be engaging with representatives from those schools, know the schools that you want to talk to. Introduce yourself to the folks at the table. Have one or two really solid questions prepared. And this is also a great chance for you, obviously, to be able to kind of give your 90-second elevator pitch to someone as well. There's no need to actually bring a resume with you. And honestly, I think folks would be much more appreciative to not have the extra paper, quite frankly. But I also cannot underscore enough the importance of trying to engage with folks as much as possible. You would be amazed the memories that admissions folks have and the ability to be able to engage with someone in person. Um, you really do make an impression. And more often than not, when admissions folks are sort of sitting in the deliberation room, you'd be amazed at how many folks they remember from various events, whether it's an online event or an in-person event. It's so important to try to make a positive first impression there. Range list for the new GMAT. So it's a good question. With regards to the GMAT, there is a concordance table. Most of the schools are still publishing score scales based off of the old scale. There is a concordance table on MBA.com where you can take a look at what the new GMAT score looks like compared to the old one. I usually will recommend to folks that you take a look at the percentiles. I think in many ways the percentiles tell a much more complete story than just the raw data and the raw numbers. And also, I would take a look at the quantitative subscore. That's something that schools will often look at and will isolate and look at, especially maybe if you have some blemishes in your transcript or maybe some gaps. Maybe if you didn't have a quant-based major as an undergrad or don't have a lot of quant-based experience, they will probably look at that quant score a little bit more closely, just to have the confidence that you were able to be successful in the classroom. See, so there are a couple of specific questions here around GPAs. So there isn't an average GPA that you're going to calculate necessarily for undergrad and graduate. Um, and I think, let's see, I will just what I would just say there is, and I don't want to get too specific, but typically they're going to be looking at the amount of time between those two degree programs or between the two programs that you've completed. And certainly, while the undergrad one is the one that gets reported in the rankings, the more recent one is certainly going to be one I think that does leave a very strong impression, particularly if it is much higher. With regards to resume consultations. I'm not sure I completely understand the question there, but what I would say if you are interested in having your resume reviewed and doing some work on it, certainly feel free to reach out to me. We can certainly set up a consultation. TTP provides free 15-minute consultations for folks. And we can certainly talk through your resume at a high level. Typically, if you're looking for something like resume revisions, that's an hour and a half or 2 hours of work that we can workshop together if that's something that you're interested in, though. And then for extracurriculars, it looks like some folks had questions about what that you include. So if the undergrad experience is relevant, and I would say if you're fewer than 3 years out from your undergrad experience, some of that work, some of those activities could certainly be included. It is, it's a little bit of a delicate dance because you don't want to rely too heavily on things that you did while you were in college. But if you are light on the extracurriculars, and if there are things that you did in college that are relevant to your current industry or what you want to do in the future, there's certainly ways to include that as well. Oh, and then an additional follow-up question about formatting. I would not bold the data on your resumes. That was just to call out some of those highlights for the purpose of the exercise here. But I would think about I would think about bolding certain headers though. So whether it's, the company that you worked for and the dates, but various things, whatever you can do to really sort of help the person reading your resume have a roadmap that's appropriate there. And then a couple of questions about quant or MBA math. So I think there are a lot of different products out on the market to kind of help boost quant. I'll be honest, I think MBA math certainly has a place. What I have heard anecdotally from folks is that it doesn't always cover everything that you would need in the first year of an MBA program. I know many folks will use the core program as well that HBS publishes. I've heard from some folks that that is almost skews a little bit further on the other end and almost gives you too much or more than you would need. But there certainly are different things that you can do if you aren't coming from a quant heavy background. For me personally, I was a liberal arts major in college. When I started looking at business school, I had a much longer runway. I actually went off and took a couple semesters worth of statistics and accounting and finance at a local university, just to be able to show business schools that I had the quantitative capabilities and chops to do well in a program. And because it had been a couple of years, and again, being a liberal arts major, I didn't have that type of coursework on my transcript. And so I think it depends a lot on your timeline, because the other thing to think about here too is that everything is going to be about trade-offs. And so the time that you spend doing a course is going to be time that you're not able to necessarily spend working on your application, particularly if your runway here is a little bit shorter. And so I would really think about being intentional about how you're choosing to spend your time as you are working on your applications. Well, I think we may have captured all of our questions for this evening. So with that, I would just say thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Again, please feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions or if you'd like to sign up for a consultation. And I wish all of you the very best of luck with your test preparation and with your MBA applications. Thank you so much for joining.